Hey guys, so today I'm gonna share something which is probably already available on the internet. You may probably find a lot of videos on YouTube, but the fact is, uh, if you Google about this specific problem, uh, the most common answer that you will usually find is something that may or may not solve your problem. Okay, so depending on what problem you are trying to solve, the answers on the internet or on YouTube may not work for you. So it's a classic problem in Apex triggers that we usually see. So basically, I have here an account trigger, and it has an after update event. And what's happening in the after update event is calling this specific handler, which has this method update account, and it's passing a map of the newly updated items. Now, inside this, what we are doing is we are creating a list of the accounts to be updated, and we are looping through the newly updated accounts. We are taking their IDs. This is another way of doing it rather than querying it. You cannot directly modify this, obviously, because it's in the after commit. So it's already locked. It's already saved to the database. So that's where what we are doing is we are using this another approach, using the ID and passing the name. And what we are doing essentially here is we are appending the keyword test uh, to the name of the account. And then eventually we are checking if it's not empty, then we are updating the account. And this is something, like an additional check for CRUD permissions. So yeah, there's that. And the way we are testing it is, so first of all, the problem that you already would have guessed is in the after update event, we are again trying to update the list of accounts. So the most common problem that we face in such a scenario is Apex trigger recursion, and it leads to Apex CPU timeout. Now, I'm not gonna go to the org and try to update an actual account because that won't show what I'm trying to solve. So like a good developer, I'm gonna use a unit test, and I'm gonna try to show the problem that I'm trying to solve. So this is a unit test, which is going to test this specific account trigger. And in that, I have a setup method. This is the recommended way of creating your test setup, test data. Always use a test setup. So that way, it doesn't matter how many methods you're running in your test class. This will only run once. So it's a recommended way of creating your test data. So what I'm doing is I'm creating 500 accounts with this name, and I'm just appending the index. So it should create accounts like account 0, account 1, until 499. And then I'm inserting them. And now this is the actual test method. What I'm doing here is I am querying them. After I've queried them, I'm again updating them. Think of it as a fake update. Okay, so here I'm doing nothing. So when I'm actually updating them, what happens is in the after update, this should happen. The keyword test should get appended to the name. Okay, and how I'm gonna test it, that, like all the records have been updated, I'm gonna write an assert statement. I'm gonna query the account object for records matching this specific pattern. And then the size should match 500, because here exactly 500 records I'm inserting, and here essentially I'm updating all of them. So the assertion should pass only if all the 500 records have been updated. Okay, so now let's see what happens. So now here I'm going to run my test class. I know some of you might say, hey, well, why do you need to go there to run the test classes? You can run from here, but for some reason I'm facing an error, no auth info found. So this is something that I'm planning to resolve later. But for now, let's just try to run it from here. So if I go there and try to run this specific test method, let's see what happens. Okay. It's going to take its sweet time because obviously it's running into a recursion, and it's going to call the same method again and again. And since we're doing it for 500 requests, so it's going to take a while. So please bear with me. Don't lose your patience. I can tell you that the solution to this problem is readily available in the market, just that sometimes it may not be as easy to find as you'd expect. The most common solution that you would find is something that may not work for you. So let's see, what is the problem here? As expected, Apex CPU time limit exceeded. Why? Because it's getting called like too many times. So now if I see this specific log, if I try to see update account, you see how many times it is getting called, like a lot. Okay, it's going into recursion as expected. So at this point, the most common answer that you would find on the internet, like a lot of YouTube videos and even blogs, like you Google for it, like how to avoid recursion in Trigger, and the first few blogs that you would find would give you a solution. Let's see what the solution is. The solution is using a static variable. Okay, let's do that. I'm going to create a static variable, public static, and the static variable is a boolean variable. It's a boolean flag. So public static boolean is first run, and I'm going to say true. Yeah, it's true. So the first time it runs, it should be true. But the moment it enters this method for the first time, I'm going to set it to false. Okay. And now here, before I call this method, I'm going to check if account trigger handler dot is first run, as simple as that. So if it's first run, no need to use is first run equals to true, because is first run is a Boolean variable, and if expects a Boolean flag. So just do directly dot is first run. And once you do that, our problem should be solved. So we should no longer get this Apex CPU time limit error. So let's see what happens. Ta-da. Here we are, trying to run this method again. And I'm going to go to this test tab. Let's see what are the results. Okay, so it failed once again. Now let's see what's the error message. Okay, this time we are not getting the Apex CPU limit exception. We are getting something else. Assertion failed. Expected 500, actual 200. It means when I queried here in the test class, the number of accounts with names fitting this pattern, like test appended to it, it's only returning 200. But my expectation is 500 because I was expecting to update 500 of them. So what went wrong? Let me tell you what went wrong. Because this is a bulkified trigger, it usually deals with data in batches. So the default amount is, the default count is 200. So when I tried updating 500 of them, what it did is essentially it split them into 200, 200, 100. Because we are trying to split 500 into batches of 200. So 200, 200, and the remaining 100. 3 batches. After the first batch is run, what happens here? The first time, no problem, because is first run is true. So it's going to run this. It's going to call this method, and it's going to update the name. And this is going to happen for the first 200 records. But at this point, the static variable is being set to false. So when the second batch is executed, what happens? This is no longer true. Skip. And as a result, when my test class runs this assertion, only 200, that is the first batch, got updated. So even though we were able to solve the original problem of recursion, this may lead to a problem that we are just facing. It may skip records. Here it's just a test class, so it's failing an assertion, but in reality, it may skip certain records. It's a practical scenario, especially when you are trying to update like more than one record, and you are like triggering update on the same object again and again, expecting it to update like a huge amount of records. This is what you'll face. After the first batch, it will just stop. So even though this is an effective way to stop recursion, it won't work if you're dealing with a huge number of records, specifically like like more than 200, because that's when the concept of batch kicks in. So how do we solve this problem? In order to solve this, so now we have two problems. We have to solve the problem of recursion, and we also have to solve the problem of skipping the updation of records after the first batch, after the first 200 records. So the best way to do this is, I'm going to get rid of this, to keep a track of what we are updating instead of just using, blindly using a Boolean flag. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take static set of IDs, and I'm going to call it accounts processed, and I'm going to initialize it to a new set of IDs. So now once I'm inside this one, what I'll do is once I've processed this, I've added to this set that I just created. So I'll say accounts processed dot add, and I'm going to add this ID. Should be fine. And at the same time, I also need to ensure that when I'm processing a certain record, I haven't already processed it. I need to make sure of that. I shouldn't be processing the same record the second time, because when you do an update inside an update after update trigger, there is always a chance of updating the same record again. So we need to avoid that. So this time, what we will do is we will check if not accounts processed dot contains acc.id, or rather I would say if it contains, then continue. This is a very nifty keyword. Usually you would see statements with like if not and then curly braces, but this is another way of skipping the same. So if it is actually contained, it should continue. When you use the continue keyword, it would just skip to the next element of the collection. Okay, so now when I do this, what's going to happen? Let's see. And right now here, nothing, no change. And for the sake of tracking this change, let's also track the value of this, like the size of this specific set. So I'm going to say accounts processed, and I'm going to put in size. So let's see. We will also get to see how exactly it's processing the entire update, all the 500 records, like whether or not the theoretical concept of like batching it in 200 records per batch, if at all it's working or not. Even that will be declared. And sorry about this. This is my Apex PMD. it's something else that we can talk about later, or maybe if you already know about it, then you don't need to worry about that. It's basically a static code analysis and has some built-in rules. So now in this case, I have pushed this one and no changes here, so nothing to push here. Or maybe I'll still push it. And now what I'm going to do is I am going to run this again. And this time, let's see if it will run or not. And mind you, this time we are trying to solve two problems, recursion as well as, we're trying to make sure that all the 500 records are processed. None of them are skipped. And the same record is also not processed twice. So let's see. And this time it passed and it was quite fast. Now let's check the logs to see what exactly happened here, what exactly transpired. So remember guys, I put in a log here to see the size of this set. So every time this method is called, it will print the size of the set. So let's put it here. And now we can see initially in the beginning, 0. Then the second time, 200. And then perhaps when the update was kicked in, it tried processing the same records again. But this time, since it still had the same value and maybe the same records were encountered, it skipped. Then next time, 400, 400, and eventually 500. So what we are seeing is essentially the size is incrementing by 200. So a theory of the batch of 200 is validated, and at the same time, the assertion passed because that's what we were after, right? Meaning all the 500 records were updated. Otherwise, this test wouldn't pass. This assertion wouldn't pass. So effectively, what we saw is even using the static boolean flag works for a relatively smaller volume of data, but when we are dealing with a bulk data, specifically like more than 200 records, this is a better approach. Basically, what you're doing is you are keeping a track of the records that you are processing and ensuring that you are not processing the same record again. The goal is not to stop multiple updates in a transaction, because in a given transaction, you may be updating different records via batch. When I say batch, not batch Apex, but in this case, since it's bulkified, it's actually split into multiple batches. That's how internally Salesforce works when you are updating like a huge volume of data. So the goal is not to stop multiple calling of this specific method. That's not what a true recursion is, even though, like by definition, recursive is calling the same method again and again. But in this case, we actually need to do that. So in the context of trigger, Apex trigger, the true meaning of recursion is when we are trying to update the same record again and again. This is the true problem that we are trying to solve here. So with this, we can ensure that the same record in a given transaction won't be processed more than once. And at the same time, we are not stopping this specific method to be called multiple times because it needs to run for other batches, other records which haven't yet been processed. So with this approach, you can resolve like quite complex problems when you're dealing with updating certain scenario. And this is a very straightforward scenario, but in reality, in practical scenarios, you may not come across this. You may have something more complicated, but even then, the same principle applies. Always keep a track of the records that you are processing. If you can do that, then you won't have this problem. And trust me, I wasn't aware of this specific approach until, yeah, that's an interesting story. I went for an interview, and then, like the way everyone talks, I mentioned the static Boolean flag. Yay, that works. But then the next question was, what happens if you're dealing with a huge amount of data? So there's that. So in that condition, it won't work. So the best way, the recommended way I would suggest is to use this specific approach. And with this, you can be sure that you won't have the problem of recursion. When I say recursion, it means the processing of the same record again and again, but yet you would be able to deal with bulk data. So with that, I'd like to end this session. If you found it helpful, feel free to like and subscribe my video. And if you have any questions, feel free to put them down in the comment section. Thank you. Bye-bye.